The feeling or sentient individual is the simple ideality or subjective side of sensation. What it has to do, therefore, is to raise its substantiality, its merely virtual feeling up, to the character of subjectivity, to take possession of it, to realize its mastery over its own. As sentient, the soul is no longer a mere natural, but an inward individuality. The individuality which, in the merely substantial totality, was only formal, to it has to be liberated and made independent. Encyclopedia section 404. As individual, the soul is exclusive and always exclusive. Any difference there in it brings within itself, by itself, this stage of mind. By itself, this stage of mind is the stage of darkness. Its features are not developed to conscious and intelligent content. So far, it is formal and only formal. It acquires a peculiar interest in cases where it is as a form and appears as a special state of mind, to which the soul, which has already advanced to consciousness and intelligence, may again sink down. When a truer state of mind thus exists in a more subordinate and abstract one, it implies a want of adaptation, which is dis-ease. In the present stage, we must treat, first, of the abstract psychical modifications by themselves, secondly, as morbid states of mind, the latter being only explicable by means of the former. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul; suprasection B, the feeling soul, soul as sentiency; di fulanda se ella; suprasection Supersubsection alpha, the feeling soul in its immediacy; metasection alpha alpha. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul; supersection B, the feeling soul, soul as sentiency; di fulanda se ella; suprasubsection alpha, the feeling soul in its immediacy; metasection alpha alpha. Encyclopedia section 405. Though the sensitive individuality is undoubtedly a monadic individual, it is therefore immediate, not yet its self, not a true subject reflected into itself, and therefore is passive. Hence, the individuality of its true self is a different subject from it, a subject which may even exist as another individual. By the selfhood of the latter, it, a substance, which is only a non independent predicate, is then set in vibration and controlled without the least resistance on its part. This outer subject by which it is so controlled may be called genius. The total sensitivity has its self here in a separate subjectivity, which, in the case cited of the sentient life, is the ordinary course of nature, is visibly present as another and a different individual. But this sensitive totality is meant to elevate its selfhood out of itself to subjectivity to one and the same individual, which is then its indwelling consciousness, self possessed, intelligent, and reasonable. For such a consciousness, the merely sentient life serves as an underlying and only implicitly existent material, and the self-possessed subjectivity is the rational, self-conscious, controlling genius thereof. But this sensitive nucleus includes not merely the purely unconscious, congenital disposition and temperament, but within its enveloping simplicity it acquires and retains also in habit all further ties and essential relationships, fortunes, principles, everything in short belonging to the character, and in whose elaboration self conscious activity has most effectively participated. The sensitivity is thus a soul in which the whole mental life is condensed. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Supersection B, the feeling soul. Soul as sentiency. D. Fulanda se ella. Supra subsection alpha, the feeling soul in its immediacy. Metasection beta beta. The sensitive life, when it becomes a form or state of self conscious, educated, self possessed human being, is a disease. The individual in such a morbid state stands in direct contact with the concrete contents of his own self and of the casual order of things apart as a distinct state of mind. This morbid condition is seen in magnetic somnambulism and cognate states. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Supersection B, the feeling soul. Soul as sentiency. D. Fulanda se ella. Supersubsection alpha, the feeling soul in its immediacy. Metasection beta beta. Quantum section alpha. To the concrete existence of the individual belongs the aggregate of his fundamental interests, both the essential and the particular empirical ties which connect him with other men and the world at large. This totality forms his actuality in the sense that it lies, in fact, immanent in him. It has already been called his genius. This genius is not the free mind, which wills and thinks. The form of sensitivity in which the individual here appears immersed is, on the contrary, a surrender of his self possessed, intelligent existence. The first conclusion to which these considerations lead, with reference to the contents of consciousness in the somnambulist stage, is that it is only the range of his individually molded world, of his private interests and narrow relationships, which appear here. Scientific theories and philosophic conceptions of or general truths require a different soil, require an intelligence which has risen out of the inarticulate mass of mere sensitivity to free consciousness. It is foolish, therefore, to expect revelations about the higher ideas from the somnambulist state. See for reference. Instead, Mephistopheles, also called Mephisto, familiar spirit of the devil, in late settings of the legend of Faust. It is probably that the name Mephistopheles was invented for the historical Johann George Faust, who lived around 1480 of the Common Era to 1540, by the anonymous author of the first Faustbuch, which was written in 1587. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Supersection B, the feeling soul. Soul as sentiency. D. Fulanda se ella. Subsection alpha, the feeling soul in its immediacy. Metasection beta beta, quantum section beta, where a human being's senses and intellect are sound, he is fully and intelligently alive to that reality of which gives concrete feelings to his individuality. Otherwise, he is awake to it in the form of interconnection between himself and the features of that reality, conceived as an external and a separate world. And he is aware that this world is in itself also a complex of interconnection of a practically intelligible kind. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Suprasection B, the feeling soul. Soul as sentiency. Diffulanda se ella. Supersubsection Alpha, the feeling soul in its immediacy. Metasection Beta Beta. Quantum section Gamma. But when all that occupies the waking consciousness, the world outside it and its relationship to that world is under a veil, and the soul is thus sunk in sleep, in magnetic sleep, in catalepsy, and other diseases. For instance, those connected with female development, where natural hormones and smells are often burdensome, then that immanent actuality of the individual remains the same substantial total as before, but now as a purely sensitive life with an inward vision and an inward consciousness. The individual is thus a monad which is inwardly aware of its actuality, a genius which beholds itself. The characteristic point in such knowledge is that the very same fact which the healthy consciousness, or better, which for the healthy consciousness are an objective practical reality, and to know which, in its sober moods, it needs the intelligent chain of means and conditions in all their real expansion, are now immediately known and perceived in this eminence. This perception is a sort of clairvoyance, for it is a consciousness living in the undivided substantiality of the genius, and finding itself in the very heart of interconnection, and so can dispense with the series of conditions, external one to another, which lead up to the result, conditions which cool reflection has in succession to traverse, and in so doing fills the limits of its own individual externality. But such clairvoyance, if for that very reason at the mercy of every private contingency of feeling and fancy and the like, not to mention that foreign suggestions intrude into the vision. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Supersection B, the feeling soul. Soul as sentiency. Diffulanda se ella. Supersubsection Alpha, the feeling soul in its immediacy. Metasection Beta Beta. Quantum section Delta. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Supersection B, the feeling soul. Soul as sentiency. Diffulanda se ella. Supersubsection Alpha, the feeling soul in its immediacy. Metasection Beta Beta. Quantum section Delta. An essential feature of this sensitivity, clairvoyance, with its absence of intelligence and volitional personality, is this, that it is a state of passivity, like that of the child in the womb. That patient in this condition is accordingly made and continues to be subject to the power of another person, the magnetizer, so that when the two are thus in psychical rapport, the selfless individual, not really a person, has for his subjective consciousness the consciousness of the other. The latter self possessed individual is thus the effective subjective soul of the former, and the genius which are present in the person with whom he stands in rapport, and that he is aware of the other inner ideas and present perceptions of the latter as if they were his own, shows the substantial identity which the soul is capable of holding with another. When the substance of both is thus made one, there is only one subjectivity of consciousness. The patient has a sort of individuality, but it is empty, not on the spot, not actual, and this nominal self accordingly derives its whole stock of ideas from the sensations and ideas of the other, in whom it sees, smells, tastes, reads, and hears. This certainly is the source of many deceptions that inevitably show themselves among somnambulists from different countries and under rapport with different persons of different education on scientific and intellectual topics. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Supersection B, the feeling soul. Soul as sentiency. D. Fulanda se ella. Super subsection alpha, the feeling soul in its immediacy. Metasection beta beta. Quantum section epsilon. Description: as in this sensitive substantiality there is no contrast to external objectivity, akin to love, so within itself the subject is so entirely won over that all verities of sensation have disappeared, and hence, when the activity of the sense organs is magnetized, it is a challenge to comprehend a thing and its meaning in the language of practical intelligence, to be able to trace the series of means intervening between a phenomenon and some other existence on which it depends, to discover what is called the ordinary course of nature, in compliance to the laws and relations of the intellect, such as causality, reason, and volition, a message to those who are not in love, to understand this intimate conjunction, which, though all embracing, is without any definite points of attachment, is impossible, so long as we assume independent personalities, independent one of another and of the objective world which is their content, so long as we assume the absolute spatial and material externality of one part of being to another. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Supersection B, the feeling soul. Soul as sentiency. D. Fulanda se ella. Super subsection beta, self-feeling, sense or self, or selbesta gefühl, or selbesta Gefühl. Metasection alpha alpha. Encyclopedia section 407. The sensitive totality is, and its capacity of individual, essentially the tendency to distinguish itself in itself and to wake up to the judgment in itself, in virtue of which it has particular feelings and stands as a subject in respect of these aspects of itself. The subject, as such, gives these feelings a place as its own in itself. In these private and personal sensations, it is immersed. And at the same time, because of the ideality of the particulars, it combines itself in them with itself as a subjective unit. In this way, it is self feeling, and is so at the same time only in the particular feeling. Subsection Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Suprasection B, the feeling soul. Soul as sentiency. D fulanda se ella. Super subsection beta, self feeling. Sense of self are. Selbesta Gefehil, metasection beta beta. Encyclopedia section 408. In consequence of the immediacy, which still marks the self feeling, in essence, in consequence of the element of corporality, which is still undetached from the mental life, and as the feeling too is itself particular and bound up with a special corporal form, it follows that although the subject has been brought to acquire intelligent consciousness, it is still susceptible of disease, so far as to remain fast in a special phase of its self feeling, unable to refine it to ideality and get the better of it. In this way, the subject finds itself in contradiction between the totality systematized in its consciousness and the single phase or fixed idea which is not reduced to its proper place and rank. This is insanity or mental derangement. Insanity is a psychical disease, in essence, a disease of the psychical attached body and love, struck mind alike. The commencement may appear to start from one more than the other, and so also may the cure. Derangement has as its main point the contradiction set up against the main. Derangement has as its main point the contradiction set up against the whole mass of adjustments forming the concrete consciousness of mind, which is in a condition of mere being. And where such being is not rendered fluid in its consciousness, ennui is diseased. The right psychical treatment, therefore, keeps in view the truth that insanity is not an abstract loss of reason, but only a derangement, a contradiction in a still subsisting reason. Just as psychical, just as physical disease is not an abstract, in essence, mere and total, loss of health, but a contradiction in its assuming the subject was originally rational. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Supersection B, the feeling soul. Soul as sentiency. D fulanda se ella. Supra subsection Gamma, habit or Gewohnheit. Encyclopedia section 409. Self feeling, immersed in the detail of the feelings, and simple sensation and also desires, instincts, passions, and their gratification, is undistinguished from them. But in the self there is latent a simple self relation of ideality, a nominal universality which is the truth of these details. And as so universal, the self is to be stamped back upon and made appear in this life of feeling, yet so as to distinguish itself from the particular details and be a rationalized universality, but this universality is not the full and sterling truth of the specific feelings and desires. What they specifically contain is as yet left out of account, and so too the particularity is, as now regarded, equally formal. It counts only as the particular being or immediacy of the soul in opposition to its equally formal and abstract realization. This particular being of the soul is the factor or its corporeity. Here we have it breaking with this corporeity, distinguishing it from itself a simple being, and becoming the ideal subjective substantiality of it, just as in its latent notion it was the substance and the mere substance of it. Encyclopedia section 410, the soul's making itself an abstract realization of the soul in its corporal vehicle is not yet the self, not the existence of the universal which is for the universal. It is the corporeity reduced to its mere ideality, and so far only does corporeity belong to the soul as such. That is to say, as space and time, the abstract one outside another, as, in short, empty space, are only subjective form, pure act of intuition, so that pure being, which, through the supersession in it of the particularity of the corporeity or of the immediate corporeity of which, it is the subjective substance, and which still continues to exist, and that as a barrier for it has been absorbed by it, and it has been invested with the character of self centered subject. And for section alpha, the main point about habit is that by its means man gets emancipated from the feelings, even in being affected by them. The different forms of this may be described as follows. The immediate feeling is negated and treated as indifferent. One who gets inured against external sensation, frost, heat, weariness of the limbs, and such things, and who hardens the heart against misfortune, acquire a strength which consists in this, that although the frostbite, Erfahrung, and such natural similes, or the misfortune is felt, the affections is disposed to a mere externality and immediacy. The universal psychical life keeps its own abstract independent in it. And the self feeling as such, consciousness, reflection, and any other purposes and activities are no bothered with it, are not bothered with it. And for section beta, there is indifference toward the satisfaction. The desires and impulses are the habit of their satisfaction deadened. This is the rational liberation from them, whereas monastic renunciation and forcible interference do not free from them, nor are they in conception rational. Of course, in all this it is assumed that the impulses are kept as finite modes they naturally are, and that they, like their satisfaction, are subordinate factors to the reasonable will. And for section gamma, in habit, regarded as aptitude or skill, not merely has the abstract psychical life to be kept intact per se, but it has to be imposed as a subjective aim, to be made a power in the bodily parts. which is rendered subject and thoroughly pervious to it, conceived as having the inward purpose of the subjective soul thus imposed upon it. The body is treated as an immediate externality and a barrier, which is the beauty of virtual reality, where the body is able to rest, while the physical mind, soul described here, goes into a realm of light and participates with some haptic response from the body. Subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Supersection C, the actual soul. Die wirkliche Seele. Encyclopedia section 411. The soul, with its corporeity, has been molded and made thoroughly its own, finds itself there a single subject, and the corporeity is an externality which stands as a predicate, aura, or electromagnetic haptic visual light of the nervous system, in being related to which it is related to itself. This externality, the aura, in other words, represents not itself but the soul, of which it is the sign. In this identity of interior and exterior, the latter subject to the former, the soul is actual. In its corporeity, it has its free shape, in which it feels itself and makes itself felt, and which, as the soul's work of art, has human, pathognomic, a diseased, concise statement of a principle. In the current matter, the principle we mean is the mind, and physiognomic, an extent growing and natural conscious. In this identity of interior and exterior, the latter subject to the former, the soul is actual. In its corporeity, it has its free shape, in which it feels itself and makes itself felt, and which, as the soul's work of art, has human pathognomic, a diseased, concise statement of a principle. In the current matter, the principle we mean is the mind, and physiognomic, an existent, growing, and natural concise statement of a principle. In the current matter, the principle we mean is in the mind and called expression.